somebody is offended by my book, that's not about me. It's absolutely got nothing to do with me. If I want to offend somebody, I actually don't write to offend, but I will, in the nature of things, cause offence. It's being offended is worthless. It's not a critical statement. It's about nothing. Anybody can be, I'm offended. I'm offended by your shirt.
I'm so sorry.
Change your shirt. It's a complete nonsense. I have twice been asked by a publisher to change a word that they felt had a kind of racial ugliness about it. And I said no to one and yes to the other, just because I thought, okay, why have a fight here over nothing? But if it really came down to having to change English words, they're just English words. It is a complete nonsense. I'm not a great fan of Roald Dahl, so I don't care what they do with him. But in principle, I do.
Howard, welcome to the programme.
Lovely to be here. Lovely to see you again.
Very nice to see you. So let's start and talk about Jewish Book Week. You clearly do feel yourself to be a Jewish writer. What does that mean?
Well, you kind of, no Jewish writer will admit to me. I'm not a Jewish writer. I'm a writer who happens to do Jewish things. And one of those Jewish things I happen to do is go to Jewish Book Week. It's been going for 72 years, and I think I've been going there for every one of those years. Feels like it anyway. That I'm not meant to, I don't want it to sound laborious. It's a fabulous festival, actually. It's unique in that almost no book festival ever makes it in London. London is famous for that. Festivals try, but expert festival runners come to London, fail. This one does not fail. And it fascinates me what that's about. Well, I tell you what I think it's about.
Well, I was going to ask, because it sounds, I mean, to those non-Jews amongst us, it might feel a little bit exclusionist.
It's not exclusionist at all. It's full of books that aren't Jewish, and writers who aren't Jewish, and performers who aren't Jewish, and readers who aren't Jewish. When you go in there, if you think, that's a little bit Jewish, but it's not too Jewish. It's not. You see me there, that I hope is not too off-puttingly Jewish, but it's taken. That's the wonderful thing. It began very much as a group for Jews at a time when Jews were anxious about being here. Not long after the war, they needed to talk about themselves. Books were a very important medium for understanding what had happened. So there was an immediate interest in it, group interest in it, and that was such a kind of an intense beginning for the festival. The festival's kernel was so strong that it just held on, and it now is one of the best book festivals you will get anywhere. It's packed. People from all over London and outside of London come. You'll get some of the most interesting people talking. Terrific events on music as well this year, by the way. It's not just books, and people love coming because there's a zest. When you go and talk there, the audiences are so keen. I always feel it's like going to a family event. And on the front row are all my aunties, more aunties than I've ever had. And they're all beaming at me, and they think, Howard, you've done so well. I mean, that's my experience. Other people don't feel those are their aunties. But everybody's listening. You get 400 or 500 people at every event. It's just tremendous.
Goodness, you've been anointed ambassador for Jewish Book Week. You absolutely need to be.
I think it's unspoken.
Unspoken. Now, I think it's fair to say, and hopefully not controversial, that there is nothing more Jewish than a Jewish mother. And your memoir is called Mother's Boy, and you're opening the book festival with the author Shalom Auslander, whose novel is called Mother for Dinner. So would it be fair to ask you what it is about mothers that's so important in Jewish culture?
They're very different mothers, I have to tell you. It's just quite a shocking book. If people come to the festival and think, oh, I don't want to hear Howard Jacobson just one more time talking about his book, come to hear Shalom Auslander, who is fascinating. Mother for Dinner could be the most shocking novel that's ever been written. And if you put an offence, if you censored it, if you put a sensitivity reader on it, there'd be no book. It's insensitive on every single line. It's a complete joy. You roar with laughter because you think, oh, he's saying that. There is nothing shocking he doesn't say. I used to think I was a shocking writer. I feel a little, I feel a mother's boy compared to Shalom. He is terrific. So we can have fun with that. But he talks about his mother, which is eating her.
Okay, so it's quite literal, the title.
Yeah, well, I'm not...
That's the way, isn't it?
I'm rereading it, and how far he's got into eating her at the moment. But it's being talked about. My mother, of course, when we took eating was an important part of my growing up, but it was a different kind of eating. It was bagels and chopped liver and all the usual corny Jewish stuff and I'm sorry to be corny about it. But I assume he loves his mother. We'll get to talk about that. I loved my mother. My mother died while I was writing this memoir, which gave a poignancy to it. But I was absolutely, Mother's Boy is a perfect title for this memoir, because that's what I was. I was a very soft, protected, looked after, cared for, worried about Jewish boy. And my father thought I'd never make it out of the house. And often I never did. I was the classic kind of pampered Jewish boy.
Interesting then that I think it was watching Annie Hall, the Woody Allen film, that made you realise that you could bring your Jewishness and your cultural heritage into your writing, as I understand it. Because when you were describing yourself and your childhood, I sort of feel like you could be describing Woody Allen's.
Yeah, yes, and there was that feeling you were not supposed to talk about him. So when in my first novel, a Jewish character appears. I say appeared because I didn't know where he came from, but in fact he ended up being the main character. I was astonished that he was Jewish and frightened that I'd had the nerve, the chutzpah, to put a Jewish, to write an English novel about an English campus and have the hero Jewish. And I thought, my parents are going to go mad. And they did say, where's that come from? You're not interested in anything Jewish, we thought. Because we were not a very orthodox family. We didn't go to the synagogue much. We did the cultural Jewish things, but we were not religious. And I would end up talking about Jews and being Jewish, astonished them and astonished me. And that's partly what my memoir is about, really. How on earth did this come about? And one of the things that I think will be interesting about my conversation with Shalom Auslander is we've come from absolutely different segments of the Jewish circle. He was brought up totally Orthodox, a completely Orthodox boy, and he's given the whole thing away now, because Orthodox boys don't eat their mothers. And I've come from the other side, so we kind of meet in the middle. What's it all about? Shalom, what's this being? I'm still trying to find out what being Jewish is about. I'm still learning what being Jewish is about.
But do you think you've become more Jewish over the course of your life, Ben?
Yes.
How's that happened and why? And is that a good thing?
Well, some people would say yes. Some people would say I like it. I like the where I found myself. I'm interested in things Jewish, much more interested than I thought I would be. Culturally, I'm not interested. I remain a very unreligious person. I'm not, I don't worship. I don't do religion. I don't do rituals. But I like thoughts. I like the history of the Jewish people. I like the Jewish imagination, which is what I'm talking about in my talk about disappointment and why Jews relish disappointment, almost invite disappointment, need disappointment. I need the misery of it for whatever peculiar reason.
Like the one thing that Jewish people seem to do about other Jewish people is stereotype them. Like you've just given me an example of what Jewish people are like. Is it fair?
No.
I mean,
No, and I shouldn't be doing it. No, but I'm rushing. I'm trying to get a lot of things in.
I've got loads of time.
All right, well then I'll take the stereotype. But the stereotypes are always to a degree true. There are lots of stereotypes about Jewish people that are true. I was brought up not by a mother that didn't want me to go out in the freezing cold weather and play football because she didn't want me to. My very delicate, beautiful Jewish baby boy skin to get hurt. That was typical of many a Jewish. It's a stereotype, but it was true of my mother, and it was true of me that I was a coward. I was brought up by that mother to be protective of myself. Stereotype. Yeah, that's not the end of the story, but those things are nonetheless true, and there's a kind of joy in the working. A writer can't write without some stereotypes. You've got to play with them. You've got to enjoy them. Otherwise, if everybody is just their own character and relate to nothing, who is anybody? What world do we?
But as you alluded to, we live in crazy times, where you might need to put this book contains offensive things on the jacket just to make sure that people don't get offended. And the idea of stereotyping. Is stereotyping Jewish people okay if you're Jewish but not if you're not?
I don't mind who does it as long as they do it well, and it depends what the stereotype is. If the stereotype is all Jewish people want to eat Gentile babies, we're back to Shalom Auslanders, and they're all...
That's cannibalism today.
There's an affectionate stereotype, which is allowed. It's not very exacting. And when I do it, I think, you can do a little bit better than that, Howard, but it's a bit fun. And then there's a hateful stereotype. And you have to ask yourself, what's the point of a hateful stereotype for? Is it to stir up further hatred? Is it to want to cause trouble? And at that point, yes, it's right to complain. But I think just loving the idea that your mother looked after you a lot and you didn't want to play football is not going to stir up any hatred.
I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. That you spoke up recently for Salman Rushdie, who in the past, you haven't been that keen on, but obviously what happened to him was horrendous, and more recently in a much more benign way, maybe, or maybe you don't think so. This conversation about Roald Dahl and removing words and taking fat out of the book and taking black out of tractor and so on. I mean, as a novelist, how do you feel about what seem to be debates that are highly unnecessary?
Well, you don't take words out of books. You leave them alone. And the fact that somebody is offended by anything is totally and completely irrelevant. If somebody is offended by my book, that's not about me. It's absolutely got nothing to do with me. If I want to offend somebody, I actually don't write to offend, but I will, in the nature of things, cause offence. Being offended is worthless. It's not a critical statement. It's about nothing. Anybody can be, I'm offended. I'm offended by your shirt.
I'm so sorry.
Change your shirt. It's a complete nonsense. I have twice been asked by a publisher to change a word that they felt had a kind of racial ugliness about it. And I said no to one and yes to the other, just because I thought, okay, why have a fight here over nothing? But if it really came down to having to change English words, they're just English words. It is a complete nonsense. I'm not a great fan of Roald Dahl, so I don't care what they do with him. But in principle, I do. I do not think you can do that. Do not think you can go anywhere near it. It's always happened. We used to have somebody called Bowdler, who Bowdlerized Shakespeare plays, but nobody took that. It was more of a religious thing than anything else. I don't care if the religious are upset by things. We're kind of used to that, and we think, well, that's all about having a nervous religious disposition. But now that it's becoming common in publishing, it's shocking. Shocking and totally, totally wrong. Nothing to be said for it. Nothing to be said for taking a word out of somebody's book because it offends somebody. Being offended is an irrelevance.
In the summer, I think at the Edinburgh TV Festival, was it, you said that now your first book would never have been published, and that nowadays you have to be more than not offensive to get a book published. So we seem to be balancing on a tightrope here. We have to be offensive enough to get published, but not too offensive, because otherwise you won't be published. How does that make sense?
I didn't know you have to be offensive to get published now.
I don't know. I'm quoting you, but I think that actually this is I'm starting to wonder whether actually it's maybe you've changed since then. Maybe it's changed, or maybe a word has been put in. But I think you've made your point on the idea of being offensive, but also aren't books for provoking people? Isn't that the whole point?
Absolutely.
I mean,
That's
not to provoke people to be upset necessarily, but if they are, then maybe you've written a really good book.
Well, exactly. If you come to a book all protected in a carapace of easily hurtfulness, what are you going to get from the book? The joy of the book is to be turned into somebody else, to be shown things that you don't normally see, to be made to feel things that you don't normally feel, in fact, to be turned upside down. And if you're already saying at the start, I'm not going to hear this, I'm not going to read about that, I'm not going to have that, well, you're going to have trouble with Shalom Auslander, I can tell you that.
I'm starting to think you're a bit obsessed with Shalom.
I like it very much, yes. I'm also plugging our event.
Yes, you're doing it brilliantly. You're a consummate professional on the plugging business. And I'm worried about quoting anything you've said in case you've changed your mind since, but I suppose that's your prerogative as well. But you have said that being Jewish doesn't make you diverse, and I was interested in that. Well, why do you believe that?
You say things to me I don't remember saying them. Sometimes it makes me sound very interesting. Oh, did I say that? How bright I was in those. Being Jewish doesn't make you very diverse. I don't know what that means. If I said...
Do you feel diverse?
Yeah.
Or do you think you're mainstream,
Oh, I've never been mainstream. If you're Jewish in England, you can't be mainstream. You are just a little bit out of it. And
but
sometimes you're a lot out of it.
Do you still think that's true?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And why do you think, I mean, do you not think that things have changed? You mentioned the fact that, when you wrote a book and you had a Jewish character in it, you were sort of like a little bit nervous about it and your parents were slightly horrified. And, that suggests that there was a degree of shame about being
That's correct.
What you were.
That's correct.
But you think that has now changed?
I certainly don't feel as much shame. And I see lots of people writing novels about Jews, and even having the word Jew. I would never put a Jew in the title. Now people write books with word Jew in the title. Like, oh, they dare do that. So that's terrific. That's changed, and the Jewish people in this country are much freer and much more open, and the country itself is much more okay about them, warm about them, curious about them. It's not a horrible thing to be Jewish in England. It's an extremely nice thing to be Jewish in England. But ultimately, I find that sometimes in reviews I get described as noisy, and I think maybe I'm being noisy. And I think noisy is, I don't want to ban the word. The word's fine. It doesn't offend me. But I think the word means, if that's a euphemism, that's not English enough. It's allowed in America. An American Jewish author is expected to be noisy. An English Jewish author, I don't know. The minute I'm saying it, I'm changing. See, I change my mind so quickly now. I'm changing it even before I finish the sentence.
If I quote it to you in 2 weeks' time, you'll be saying, did I really say that?
If you quote it to me in 5 minutes' time, I'll say, did I really say that?
I wondered if your Jewish readers get offended by what you've written ever. I mean, you've hinted that your next novel might be about sexually deviant older people. Do you think that might tip you over the edge of your appreciation society?
I've written about deviant older people before.
Indeed. This looked like it was fully themed.
Yes, this is more fully themed. How does anybody know? I don't know. I told anybody about my new novel. It's got out.
Well, I haven't made that up unless I'm.
No, it's true. It's true. I just didn't. I didn't know. I'd say I'm glad the word is out there. Yes, I think. Well, one man's deviance is another man's. What I think is deviant, probably someone else would think is tame. I'm getting old now, so things that shock me would not shock somebody half my age, and that's not about being Jewish or anything. It's just about if you have a long life as a writer, and I've been writing novels now for. This is more or less my 40th anniversary, the 40th anniversary of my first novel. That's a long enough time, I guess, to feel you've been doing it a long time. And there are people now who will be reviewing my next book who weren't born when my first novel was published. That's a shock. So they're going to be very different kinds of people, and their tolerance level will be different. Their sense of humour will definitely be different. I feel when I first started writing a novel, I felt I don't know where this book will go because I feel I'm in a foreign world. I don't know. My voice has not been tested in this world yet. How will it go down? And then I had a nice feeling of, okay, I know where my voice is in this world. Now, as I get older still, and the young get more inexplicable to me because of social media, I suppose, and other things like that. I don't know what they're reading. I don't understand everything that they're saying all the time, and I wonder what they will do with me. So I do feel now that I've come full circle. I'm now in a world which might be as bewildered by me as I thought it was going to be 40 years ago. But then this just might be a weird kind of arrogant. Maybe I like it. Maybe I like nothing I would love more than to think that I cause immense amount of discomfiture. I'd love that.
And that you can sustain it over a whole career. I mean, that's got to be something to take enormous satisfaction from. But one person unlikely to turn up at Jewish Book Week, to your talk or any of them, perhaps it would be Jeremy Corbyn, perhaps, and you were very vocal about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I hope you remember that.
I do remember that, and I was, yes.
Do you feel satisfied now that Keir Starmer has fully eradicated that sort of blight from the party?
I think he has done a good job. I think it's a difficult thing that he has to do to tell Jeremy Corbyn he can't stand. Well, he's not telling Jeremy Corbyn he can't stand. He's saying he can't stand as a Labour. And that's fair enough. I think you can say, we don't want that voice in our party, but we can't stop you standing as an independent, and we will have to live with that. I take no satisfaction. I don't feel I've ousted or outed Jeremy Corbyn or anything.
Cancelled him.
No, I certainly don't want to cancel him. I want him to be there. I want him to be there every day as a living lesson. Because there was a lot to learn from that, because he was such an interesting example of someone who a lot of the time didn't understand what the convict, just didn't understand because he wouldn't listen. To me, he was an interesting example of conceitedness. I thought a very, very arrogant man who closed his ears. I never met him and I've never spoken to him. But when he was on television, I would imagine that I was speaking to him and I saw him closing his face. He's closed his face to me. He's refused to listen. I could see him refusing to listen to me, and I thought this would be difficult because there was a supreme arrogance about him. I know what I think. Particularly, none of us should know what we think. We should think we know what we think, and we should aspire to think well, and we should aspire to change what we think. But to know what we think, that's what causes all the trouble.
Very, very much in agreement with you on that, Howard Jacobson, and thank you very much indeed for joining me here today on Times Radio. Howard will, as I said at the beginning, be open Jewish Book Week, and he certainly made it sound like a place that we all need to visit. And if you enjoyed that, we've got a podcast where you can listen to some of our other big interviews, all fascinating people like Howard Jacobson, reflecting on their lives and careers, as well, of course, as the issues of today. It's called Mariella Meets, and it showcases some of our favourite guests. So Howard will definitely be up there by the end of the week. You could also find Neil Gaiman, Emma Thompson, and many, many more. There's new uploads each week. You can find it on the Times Radio app.